You know that moment when someone asks, "How are you?" and without even thinking, you say, "I'm fine," but you're not fine. In fact, you're exhausted, you're overwhelmed, maybe you're even a little lonely. But instead of telling the truth, you smile and push through because that's what we're supposed to do, right? Keep it together, look like we've got it all figured out. I get it. I've done it too. For years, I thought being fine was the goal, that if I could just keep things looking good on the outside, everything would eventually feel good on the inside. But here's the truth. Hiding who we really are never leads to happiness. It leads to disconnection, exhaustion, and a constant fear of being found out. What I learned through my research is this. People who report the highest levels of joy and contentment in their lives aren't the ones who have it all together. They're the ones who are willing to be seen, really seen. And I know that sounds vulnerable and maybe even a little terrifying, but there is no true happiness without authenticity. You cannot build a meaningful life on a foundation of pretending. And here's why. Hiding who you are comes at a cost. And here's the thing, most of us don't even realize we're doing it. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, almost quietly, a little edit here, a little silence there. You laugh at the jokes that don't feel funny. You say yes when every part of you is screaming no. You push down the parts of yourself that feel too much or not enough, and the world claps for it. Because we're taught from a young age that belonging means fitting in, and fitting in means being what others expect. But here's the truth, every time you hide a piece of who you are to make others comfortable, you pay a price. I once talked to a man who, by every measure of success, had made it. High-level executive, beautiful home, more accolades than he could count. And yet, he said to me, I feel like I'm playing a role I never auditioned for. I don't even know if the people in my life love me or the version of me I show them. That broke my heart a little. But it's not uncommon. So many of us wear masks at work, in our relationships, even with the people we love most. And here's the scary part. If you spend long enough pretending to be someone else, you start to forget who you really are. Research backs this up. Psychologists call it self-alienation, when you suppress or deny your true thoughts, feelings, and values to avoid conflict or gain acceptance. And it's exhausting. People who consistently hide parts of themselves report higher levels of anxiety, stress, and burnout. And it doesn't just affect how you feel emotionally. It takes a toll physically. There's a study that found people who regularly suppress their emotions are more likely to struggle with chronic pain, digestive issues, and weakened immune systems. The body keeps score. And yet we still do it. Why? Because on some level, many of us believe the real version of ourselves isn't enough. We think if people knew the whole truth, my insecurities, my fears, the parts of me I'm not proud of, they'd walk away. So we hustle, we polish the edges, we become masters at showing what's acceptable and hiding what feels risky. And for a while it works. You get the promotion, you keep the peace, you avoid the hard conversations. But the cost? You stop feeling seen. I've felt it myself. I know what it's like to sit in a room full of people and still feel completely alone. Not because they don't care, but because you're not actually bringing your real self into the room. And when you do that long enough, you start to feel disconnected not just from others, but from yourself. You start to wonder, if I'm constantly editing who I am to fit in, will anyone ever truly know me? And the thing is, this isn't just about relationships. It shows up in every part of our lives. At work, when we silence our ideas because they feel too bold. In friendships, when we hold back from saying what we really need because we're afraid of being a burden. And let's not even get started on social media, where the pressure to curate a perfect life can make you feel like the messier, more complicated parts of your reality don't belong anywhere. But here's the truth I've learned. The parts of you that you're most tempted to hide, those are usually the parts that make you the most human. And it's our humanness, our realness, that creates the deepest connection. When we hide who we are, we don't just lose connection with others, we lose connection with ourselves. And I know this isn't easy. There's risk in being real. There's always a chance that if you show up fully, some people won't get it. Some people might leave. But here's the harder truth. If you never let yourself be fully seen, you'll never feel fully loved. Because no matter how much people say they love you, it won't touch the parts of you that stay hidden. So here's the invitation. What would it look like to let yourself be known, really known? What if the goal wasn't to be perfect, but to be whole? The price of hiding is high, and the reward for being real, freedom. Freedom to breathe, to belong, and to finally be at home with yourself. Perfectionism is the enemy of happiness. I used to wear my perfectionism like a badge of honor. If you had asked me about it years ago, I would have told you, I'm just someone who likes to do things well. That's the lie perfectionism sells us, that it's about striving for excellence, being your best self, but it's not. At its core, perfectionism isn't about being better, it's about being accepted. It's the voice that whispers, if you can just get it right, no one will see your flaw. No one will judge you. No one will leave. And the thing about perfectionism, it's never satisfied. I once spoke with a woman who had spent years chasing the perfect life. She had the right job, the right house, the right image, but when she finally reached all the goals she thought would make her happy, she found herself feeling more anxious and disconnected than ever. She said, I thought if I could just do everything perfectly, I'd finally feel like I was enough. But instead, I feel exhausted and I'm still waiting to feel like I'm okay. I know that feeling, and maybe you do too. What we don't talk about enough is how much fear drives perfectionism. It's not about healthy striving or wanting to do well. Those things can be life-giving. Perfectionism, on the other hand, is rooted in shame and fear of judgment. It's the belief that if we don't look perfect, perform perfectly, or have it all together, we'll be rejected. And here's what I've learned. Perfectionism isn't just painful, it's paralyzing. When we're caught in perfectionism, we don't take risks because the thought of failure feels too threatening. We avoid tough conversations because we don't want to say the wrong thing. We overthink, overwork, and overplease in a desperate attempt to avoid criticism. And the irony, all that effort to avoid pain just creates more of it. There's research to back this up. Studies show that perfectionism is correlated with higher levels of anxiety, depression, and burnout. People who struggle with perfectionism report feeling less satisfied in their relationships and more isolated, even when they appear to be doing fine on the outside. And one study found that perfectionists are more likely to struggle with chronic stress and physical health issues, including heart problems and immune dysfunction. It's not just exhausting, it's harmful. And yet, many of us still hold on to the belief that perfectionism will protect us. If we're perfect parents, our kids won't struggle. If we're perfect at work, no one will question our worth. If we look perfect, we'll never feel unlovable. But here's the truth. Perfectionism doesn't protect us. It isolates us. When you're constantly curating your life, people don't get to know the real you. They know the polished version. The version that's been edited for approval. And here's the hard part. You can't experience real joy if you're spending all your energy performing. Because joy requires presence, and perfectionism pulls us out of the present moment and into endless self-evaluation. I've seen this play out so many times. I once worked with a leader who was brilliant, sharp, insightful, deeply talented. But she was so consumed by the need to be perfect that she second-guessed every decision she made. She told me, I feel like I'm living with a constant fear of being found out. Like one mistake will undo everything. And here's what I told her and what I'll tell you. You don't have to earn your worth. You already have it. And I know that's easy to say and hard to live because for many of us, perfectionism isn't just a habit. It's how we've learned to survive. Maybe you grew up in a household where love felt conditional, where being good was how you stayed safe. Or maybe the world has shown you that mistakes come with real consequences, so you armor up. If that's your story, I want you to know I see you. And I also want to say gently but clearly, there's a different way to live. What if you didn't have to prove yourself to be loved? What if being imperfect didn't make you unworthy? What if you believed that you were already enough Not when you achieve more, not when you look better, but right now. Because here's the truth. Perfection isn't the path to happiness. Being real is. And the moment you let go of the need to be perfect is the moment you start to feel free. True belonging requires authenticity. For years, I believed that belonging was about fitting in, about knowing how to read a room, adjust, and become whatever version of myself was most acceptable. And for a while, I got really good at it. I could shape shift with the best of them. Smile when I wanted to cry, stay quiet when I had something to say, play small when I was aching to be seen, and people seemed to like me. But here's the thing. I felt more alone than ever, because the truth is, you can be surrounded by people and still feel completely unseen if you're not showing up as yourself. And I'm not the only one. I can't tell you how many times I've sat across from someone successful, respected, even deeply loved, and heard them say, I don't think anyone really knows me. That's the heartbreak of fitting in. You spend so much time becoming what others want that you start to lose track of who you are. Here's the difference. Fitting in is about changing yourself to be accepted. Belonging is about being accepted for who you truly are. And those are two very different things. One requires you to edit yourself. The research backs this up. People who have a strong sense of authentic belonging, where they can show up fully without pretense, report higher levels of life satisfaction, better mental health, and stronger relationships. But the people who constantly hustle for acceptance, they're more likely to experience anxiety, loneliness, and chronic feelings of disconnection. Because when you hide the parts of yourself that feel too messy or too complicated, you also block yourself from experiencing real connection. And let's be honest, most of us learned pretty early that belonging had rules. Maybe you grew up in a home where being accepted meant you had to be the easy child, the one who didn't cause trouble. Or maybe it was at school where you realized that standing out could make you a target. And so we learn to blend in. We learn to adapt. We learn to silence the parts of us that might make people uncomfortable. And we think, if I can just be who they want me to be, I'll finally feel like I belong. But here's the paradox. The more you abandon yourself for belonging, the more isolated you feel. I once spoke with a college student who had spent years trying to be the perfect friend. She said yes to everything. She was always available. She never shared when she was struggling because she didn't want to be a burden. And one day she realized something painful. I'm everyone's friend, but no one really knows me. And the truth she was bumping into is this. You can't experience real belonging if you're hiding the parts of yourself that most need to be seen. It's not that people don't care. It's that we can only be loved to the extent that we allow ourselves to be known. And when we trade authenticity for approval, we might gain acceptance, but we lose the one thing that actually fills us up, being loved as we are. I get why it's hard. There's risk in showing up fully. There's always the chance that if you let yourself be seen, really seen, someone won't get it. But there's a greater risk in hiding. When you spend your life performing, you never get to know the deep, soul-filling experience of being loved for who you are, not who you pretend to be. And this isn't just about personal relationships. It happens everywhere. At work, where we hide our ideas because we're afraid they'll be rejected. In families, where we don't speak up because we don't want to rock the boat. Even in our closest friendships, where we hold back parts of ourselves for fear of being too much. But here's the thing. You cannot selectively belong. If you only show the safe, easy parts of yourself, the love you receive won't touch the parts of you that feel most vulnerable. So what does real belonging look like? It looks like honesty. It looks like letting yourself be known even when it feels risky. It looks like trusting that the people who are meant to stay will love you, not in spite of your imperfections, but because of them. And listen, I'm not saying it's easy. Being real can be uncomfortable, but I also know this. The cost of hiding is too high. because there is no version of belonging that's worth losing yourself. And if you're wondering, well, but if I'm too much, what if people leave? I'll tell you this. The people who can't handle your authenticity were never offering you true belonging to begin with. Vulnerability is the birthplace of joy. I know that sounds backward. Most of us are taught that vulnerability is weakness, something to avoid at all costs. It's risky, it's uncomfortable. It feels like handing someone a map of all the places where you could be hurt and hoping they don't use it against you. And yet, in all my years of research, I've found one truth that I can't unlearn. You cannot experience real joy without allowing yourself to be vulnerable. It makes sense if you think about it. Joy isn't something you can manufacture or control. It's not neat or polished. It shows up in the raw, unfiltered moments when your heart is wide open. But here's the catch. You can't open your heart to joy without also opening it to the possibility of pain. And that's where most of us get stuck. I remember talking to a mother who told me something I've never forgotten. She said, every time I look at my kids, I feel this overwhelming love. And then almost immediately I feel terrified. What if something happens to them? What if I lose this? And I understood exactly what she meant, that creeping sense of dread when things feel too good. It's what I call foreboding joy, the feeling that if you let yourself fully enjoy something, you're just inviting disaster. And here's why that matters. When we armor up against vulnerability, we don't just protect ourselves from pain, we also block ourselves from feeling joy. The research is clear on this. People who struggle to embrace vulnerability report lower levels of happiness, fewer meaningful relationships, and greater feelings of disconnection. On the other hand, people who practice vulnerability, who allow themselves to be seen and known, experience higher levels of joy, deeper intimacy, and a greater sense of meaning in their lives. But we resist it because somewhere along the way we learn that being vulnerable means being exposed. And in a world that rewards perfection and certainty, showing up with your imperfections feels risky. So we numb, we distract ourselves, we keep things surface level. And sure, it's safer, but it's also lonelier. I see this all the time. A man who won't tell his partner how much he loves her because he's afraid she won't say it back. A friend who doesn't share her struggles because she doesn't want to burden anyone. Parents who hold back their joy because they think it's a setup for heartbreak. And I get it. Vulnerability feels like walking a tightrope without a safety net. But here's the truth. The moments that bring us the most joy in life are also the moments where we feel the most vulnerable. Think about the times when your heart felt the fullest, holding a newborn baby, falling in love, sharing a dream out loud for the first time. None of those moments are guaranteed. There's always a risk that things won't go the way you hope. But the alternative, shutting yourself off to avoid that risk, costs more. I learned this lesson the hard way. For years, I thought I could protect myself from disappointment by keeping my expectations low. If I didn't get too excited, I wouldn't get hurt. But all that did was rob me of joy in the present. What I finally realized is this: you can't selectively numb emotions. If you shut down vulnerability to avoid pain, you also shut down your ability to feel joy, love, and connection. So what does it actually mean to practice vulnerability? It means allowing yourself to be seen, not the polished version, but the real, messy, human version. It means saying, I love you first. It means sharing your dreams even when you're afraid people will laugh. It means showing up for the people you care about without knowing if they'll show up for you. And yes, it's uncomfortable, but it's also where all the magic happens. I once met a woman who had lost her husband unexpectedly, and I'll never forget what she said. She told me if I had known how it would end, I'd still choose to love him, because the joy we shared was worth the pain of losing him. That's the heart of it. Vulnerability is scary because it means opening yourself to loss, but it's also the only way to experience the fullness of love and joy. And here's what I want you to hear. Your capacity for joy is directly tied to your willingness to be vulnerable. You don't get to experience one without the other. The more you lean into life, messy, unpredictable, and beautiful, the more joy will find you. So the next time you feel joy rising in your chest and that little voice whispers, don't get too comfortable, it won't last, I want you to do something radical. Stay in the moment, let yourself feel it, because joy isn't something to protect yourself from, it's something to welcome with your whole heart. You can't have real happiness without self-compassion. I used to think self-compassion was something other people needed. People who couldn't quite keep it together. If you'd asked me years ago, I would have told you, I'm fine. I'm tough. I don't need to be soft with myself. What I didn't realize at the time was how much that toughness was costing me. I wasn't being strong. I was being hard on myself. And there's a big difference between the two. Here's the truth. We cannot shame ourselves into being better. Believe me, I've tried. I thought if I just criticized myself enough, if I kept a running list of everything I did wrong, I'd somehow become the person I wanted to be. But instead of making me stronger, that self-criticism made me smaller. It made me hesitate. It made me second guess myself. And it definitely didn't make me happier. And I know I'm not alone. I talk to people all the time who are incredibly kind to the people around them. Friends, family, even strangers. But when it comes to themselves, it's a whole different story. The voice in their head is relentless. You should be better. You're not doing enough. You're falling short. And we convince ourselves that this inner critic is helping us, that if we let up, if we were too kind to ourselves, we'd fall apart. But here's the truth. Self-criticism doesn't drive lasting change. Self-compassion does. The research is clear on this. Studies show that people who practice self-compassion, people who treat themselves with the same kindness they'd offer a friend, are more resilient, less anxious, and experience higher levels of happiness. And the best part? They're also more motivated. I know that sounds counterintuitive. We think being hard on ourselves is what keeps us on track, but it's actually the opposite. Self-compassion gives us the courage to try, to fail, and to try again, because we know that our worth isn't on the line. I remember talking with a man who had spent most of his life pushing himself, always chasing the next goal, always raising the bar. From the outside, he looked like he had it all together. But when he finally let himself slow down, he admitted something that stuck with me. He said, I'm exhausted, and no matter how much I achieve, I still feel like I'm not enough. But that's the trap of perfectionism and self-criticism. It keeps us running on a hamster wheel, always trying to earn our worth. And it's never enough, because no amount of external success can heal an internal belief that says, I'm only worthy when I'm perfect. And listen, I get it. It's not easy to be kind to yourself when you're used to being your own toughest critic. For a lot of us, self-compassion feels like weakness. We think, if I'm too soft, I'll get lazy, I'll stop trying. But here's what I want you to know. Self-compassion isn't about letting yourself off the hook. It's about giving yourself the support you need to keep going. Imagine you're talking to a friend who's struggling. Would you tear them down? Would you list all their mistakes? Of course not. You'd encourage them. You'd remind them of their strengths. You'd help them get back on their feet. And yet, when it's us, when we're the ones struggling, we somehow think we deserve to be beaten down. But we don't. And if you want real lasting happiness, you have to start treating yourself like someone worthy of kindness. I'm not saying it's easy. Self-compassion takes practice, especially if you've spent years believing that being tough on yourself is the only way to succeed. But the truth is, you can't hate yourself into happiness. You can't bully yourself into joy. What you can do, what actually works, is learning to meet yourself with grace. And here's the thing. This isn't just about how you feel, it's about how you live. When you stop treating yourself like a problem to be fixed, you start showing up differently. You take more risks because failure isn't the end of the world. You allow yourself to rest because you know you're worthy of care. You connect with people more deeply because you're no longer hiding the parts of yourself that feel imperfect. I once met a woman who had spent years hiding her dreams. She wanted to be a writer, but couldn't get past the voice in her head that said, "Who do you think you are?" Every time she tried, the fear of not being good enough would shut her down. But something shifted when she started practicing self-compassion. Instead of attacking herself when she struggled, she started saying, it's okay to be a beginner. It's okay to try. And you know what? She finished her book, not because she silenced her inner critic completely, but because she learned to offer herself kindness in the face of it. And that's the invitation for all of us. What if you spoke to yourself the way you speak to the people you love? What if you believed that your worth wasn't tied to your productivity, your achievements, or your ability to be perfect? What if, instead of constantly chasing some future version of yourself, you started offering kindness to who you are right now? Because here's what I know. Real happiness isn't about being perfect. It's about being kind to yourself on the journey. And that kindness, it changes everything. At the heart of it all, real happiness isn't about perfection, fitting in, or keeping up appearances. It's about being real. It's about having the courage to show up as your full, authentic self, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about letting yourself be seen, choosing vulnerability over armor, and treating yourself with the same compassion you so freely give to others. And here's the truth. When you stop performing and start embracing who you really are, everything changes. Your relationships deepen, joy becomes easier to find, and maybe most importantly, you finally realize that you are already enough just as you are. No more hustling for worth. No more waiting until you're perfect to believe you deserve love and happiness. You deserve those things right now. So as you leave today, I want to offer you a challenge. Show up as yourself. Not the polished, edited version, the real you. Take the risk to be seen even when it feels vulnerable. Let yourself experience joy without waiting for the other shoe to drop. And when that voice of self-criticism creeps in, and it will, meet it with kindness. Because the world doesn't need a perfect version of you. It needs the real you.